constant state of fear and misery. No youngest me anymore. And live in a constant state of fear and misery. No youngest, no youngest, no. Live in a constant state of fear and misery. No youngest me anymore.
Hello, everybody. So today is Thursday, December 27th, and we're bringing you Block Digest number 149 at block height 555,772. So what is up?
Yeah, nothing much, man. Just been trying to get through the holidays here and make something of it. But yeah, sounds like you went through a little bit of an ordeal. You doing all right now?
Yeah, I was attacked by an alien facehugger and had to get the larvae extracted from my chest. Medical technology has really evolved to do wondrous things nowadays.
Yeah, I imagine that would have some effect on your ability to speak. But how was your holiday, Janine? You doing okay today?
Yeah, pretty good. I was mostly just watching the fiasco that is the airports in the UK because they claim that they were attacked by drones, or someone claimed that they were attacked by drones, which basically stranded everyone in the airport for a couple of days and ruined possibly their Christmas. Turns out there might have not been any drone because they have not found a drone. They have not found a suspect that's a credible suspect. They arrested some people. They published those people's names in the newspaper, but then they found out, oh, they're not actually the suspects because, they were not even near the scene at the time. And so, yeah, a couple airports got closed down, and there's no drone that we know of. The funny part is I tweeted because one of my favorite theories about why that happened is because the BBC has been advertising or giving a lot of interviews with these people from anti-drone technology companies. So the theory is that the anti-drone technology companies, because they are so specialized at being able to detect drones, obviously they would also know how to be undetectable. So maybe they sent a drone in order to ruin everyone's Christmas and then get free advertising on BBC, like, oh, we should hire these people so that, Christmas doesn't get ruined.
That sounds like I guess that could happen. Good theory. I mean, I was just thinking maybe it's another crypto trader that's just really pissed off that some exchange isn't answering him in the UK, and so he did something extravagant to try and get the law enforcement's attention.
Oh yeah, because I just realized that someone sending a mail bomb got less press than someone flying a drone near an airport. Pretty
Well,
strange.
those 2-pound pieces of plastic, they cause some serious damage to a giant multi-ton piece of steel.
Yeah, apparently they can rip through the wings and stuff at high enough speed.
Yeah, they'll rip you right out of the air. Dangerous things. Yeah. I just spent the holidays. I made myself a little healthy meal and caught up on some really old South Park. I went all the way back to season 1, 2, and 3 and watched some of those episodes, and it's just like, yeah, it really is one of those things where it's like, man, I'm getting old. These things are like 20 years back, and you can really tell that it's 20 years back, and times have changed, and it's good to just sort of let the thoughts flow through South Park and reminisce of those times gone by.
That sounds more interesting than the 2-hour reindeer migration documentary that I saw, which was supposed to end with a bunch of baby reindeers once they reached the summer pastures, or at least the warmer pastures, and they didn't show the babies. They showed one baby after 2 hours.
Because that's the only baby that made it.
No, that's not the case.
Nature's cool, man.
The photographer was just very lazy. He thought, oh, it's a good idea to go like hundreds of miles with these reindeer I don't think, well, no, it wasn't hundreds of miles. It was about 100 miles probably. Go 100 miles with these reindeer, but then when you get to the destination, only film one baby. That's how it works.
Yeah, they like to keep everybody excited about Santa and where he's at and the reindeer and all that stuff. But yeah, I guess we should dig right into it because looks like there's some crew been doing something in Bitcoin that they don't want us to know about what's been going on. So why don't you break that one down for us, Shinobi? What's been going on in Bitcoin private?
So, researchers working for coinmetrics.io were doing a little poking around and put together a huge clusterfuck, shady thing, scam, what have you, for Bitcoin private. And noticed that when they use the get transaction outset info RPC method for a Bitcoin private node, it returned an outstanding supply that was 2 million greater than what it actually should be. And so obviously the first thing they did was go through all of this and get rid of any potential explanations that would explain this without any kind of malicious activity. First, looking at the actual RPC method source code, which had not been altered since it was forked from Bitcoin, so that rules that out. Another potential explanation was that ZK snarks might be broken. They ruled that out. And they thought that potentially their node could be getting a chain fed to them that was not the longest from an incorrect source, and they ruled that out. And so pretty much narrowed down, the only explanation being that these 2 million coins were surreptitiously added during the forking process. And digging a little deeper into this, found that over 300,000 of these 2 million Instamine coins had already been sent to exchanges. And what they found out when really digging into the mechanisms of how this was accomplished, and the Bitcoin private development team has acknowledged this at this point, was when Bitcoin private forked, what it actually did was fork from the Zcash Classic network. So it's not actually forked away from or derived from the Bitcoin network at all. The way that the Bitcoin outputs were introduced was through a special mechanism where during a period of 65,000 blocks, the difficulty was artificially cranked down, and the Coinbase outputs were allowed to include arbitrary outputs with which they were able to import all of the existing Bitcoin outputs from the snapshot at the time of the network fork that they took of the Bitcoin UTXO set. And so the reason they did this was to, one, with the difficulty adjustment, allow this to happen quickly without expensive proof of work. And the reason they broke it up among so many blocks is because of the validation complexity that could have occurred if you had simply one gigantic gigabyte block that could have caused a lot of problems for the nodes validating it. And in their response to this, the Bitcoin private team claims that nobody in the team was involved in this incident. And they point to a developer called AirK42 who accepted an outstanding bounty issue in the GitHub repo that was put out by Red. And this was to actually create the functionality allowing arbitrary transactions in the Coinbase during that forking period. And their claim is that this was allowed and performed by somebody not involved with the Bitcoin private team. And the only reason it was possible was because a lack of a check in this feature for making sure that all of the transactions involved in issuing the Bitcoin outputs, it was supposed to check to make sure that there were more than one outputs. And now again, I am not a developer here, so if there is any error in what I'm about to go over, please reach out so I can correct myself. But looking at the way that this fork was structured, the way that these coins were introduced, and the Bitcoin private team's response to this, I cannot take any attitude towards this except they're completely and utterly full of shit. Because the entire way that this fork was structured was you had this series of 65,000 blocks where the miners would create these arbitrary outputs to introduce the Bitcoins into the network. And they did this by taking a file that had each individual output that was taken from the Bitcoin UTXO set. And pretty much during this migration period of artificially low difficulty, when you upgraded to the Bitcoin private client, if you were mining, you would have this UTXO set file, and it would include all of these UTXOs. I think it was 200 per block or something, and slowly introduce them. If you didn't have the UTXO set file, then your client would not mine at all. And users were supposed to have a copy of this UTXO set to validate it. And then after this period of 65,000 blocks, they would introduce a checkpoint and release a new client with that checkpoint so that people would be able to bootstrap without this UTXO set file. And so my question is, if, as Bitcoin private developers are claiming, the only reason this was able to happen was these Coinbase outputs were not checked to make sure that there was only, this size constraint. How the fuck were these coins introduced when the client was supposed to be pulling them from this UTXO set file? Clients were supposed to be validating against that UTXO file. So, but pretty much what they're saying here, if this was not intentionally and maliciously planned out by the Bitcoin private team, is they were so incompetent and there were so few people involved in the launch and forking of this coin, and nobody actually validated any of this. So, really, let's look at the two potential alternatives here. Either these people got together, decided to create a whole new cryptocurrency, set up this new mechanism, pulled the Bitcoin outputs, the UTXO set, into a Zcash fork, and didn't validate anything. Or the much simpler explanation, this was intentionally planned, and the small set of people involved in actually bootstrapping Bitcoin private through this period were all complicit in it. I mean, really, what seems more logical here?
Yeah. I mean, it just makes, it just sounds like a lot of scrambling to try and explain something that they thought might not be revealed. And, just in itself, the inception of Bitcoin private and the way that it, all those forks were getting spit out. I mean, I think one of the most prevalent one, Bitcoin Gold, even went through 51% attacks. And I mean, I don't take any of these really seriously, especially whenever they do things like this, like labeling themselves as private. I mean, I guess, and using the Bitcoin moniker to just try and attract attention, and using the UTXO set to try and airdrop a bunch of this stuff out to where you try and entice people to, exchange their real Bitcoin for this, and, see if there's ways to rip them off there. We know there's lots of problems with all that where people are exchanging one fork for another. And, really just like the Zcash Classic was a fork of Zcash that removed the founders reward. And so these guys forked that and put in this Premine. That's
And they
kind of
also
comical.
reinstated the founders reward too.
And they reinstated the founders reward. So yeah, it just like sounds like 10 different ways to scam someone in this Bitcoin private group. And I mean, I can understand them trying to back at say like, oh, this isn't something we saw, because I mean, once you get outed for these blatant ways to rip people off, I mean, you either come out clean or you do this. You try and come up with an excuse. And here in crypto, it's like if you can't define what exactly your use case is today, that's all right. Tomorrow you'll have something new, and the next day you'll have something new. And so it's not that surprising to see them try and take that route where it's like, oh well, we didn't know. We're working on the development. We're going to fix this. But I mean, the reality is
that's the cherry on top. Is their fix? Well, when they forked, there were only around 17,000 Bitcoin private in shielded addresses, which were Z Classic coins at the time. And this Premine put all of these Instamine Bitcoin private into shielded addresses. So Coinmetric is looking at an estimate of 20,000 legitimate Bitcoin private in shielded addresses, with around 1.7 to 1.8 million Instamined coins. And so the Bitcoin private team solution is let's just delete all shielded coins. And like they're literally like telling exchanges to stop deposits and withdrawals. And they want to just delete all of these shielded coins. So like the level of stupid here is absurd. And they're telling people to quickly move any legitimate shielded coins into transparent addresses. But see, the thing is, the whoever did this, the Bitcoin private team, can just move the Instamined coins into unshielded addresses too. And then what are you going to do? Just start arbitrarily deleting inputs that you think were the hacked ones? Just delete all the ones who just moved out of shielded addresses? And like there is no explicit consensus rule that says there can only be this many coins. Like that's all enforced through the Coinbase and how many coins are allowed to be in that. And then rules that say the outputs of a transaction cannot be more than the inputs. So like that's how supply is enforced in these systems. There is no explicit rule that says there can only be this many total coins. So the hacker, air quote, sarcastically, can just move all of their coins into transparent addresses too, and the system will allow that. So like like this is insane. Like they get busted red-handed just printing 2 million coins out of thin air and trying to hide it with shielded transactions. And so their solution is let's just delete them all now.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's not much of this that sounds like it's private or a blockchain at all. Like, it sounds like somebody's just running rampant with an Excel spreadsheet trying to save their ass or whatever narrative they've been building. I mean, it looks like, it's hit them in the price. I mean, back at around the 16th, it looks like they started falling pretty hard. I guess, this is something, at least, something to take out of it was like this coinmetrics.io, at least, this is some part of chain analysis where it's like, done some good there where, at least these guys were looking at this and saying, there's all kinds of problems with the way that these coins are getting moved around and the shielded addresses. And I mean, that's, I mean, at least, I mean, it's still at $1 something, and I'm sure people still have the ability to, trade for it. So, as long as this information's out there, at least some people are getting that and they're staying away from it. But, Yeah, I mean, really, I don't take any of this excuse stuff seriously. It's just too many ways built in there to rip someone off, to try and just act like, oh yeah, this was any sort of serious project that was trying to somehow increase privacy on a blockchain. Whenever it's just like the rules and everything to enforce it just allow you to run rampant with the supply like that. It's ridiculous. Pretty bad, pretty bad bad outcome for those guys. But I don't know. I guess eventually a lot of these things are going to come home to roost, where it's like, all right, we didn't really know what we were doing, and we kind of just were flying by the seat of our pants and thought we can work it out through all this confusing code. But people are getting smarter on all this, and so hopefully as time goes on, we'll see less of these.
I mean, it just goes to show, like, these forks, like these fucking bottom of the barrel shitcoins, they're scammers. Like, Rhett is a serial scammer. He just forks things and prints money out of thin air. And like, it's you, like, the people in this ecosystem need to start calling this shit out and not humoring it. Like, I mean, this is ridiculous. They print 2 million coins out of thin air. They've already sold 300K of them. Now they're literally like Vitalik, like, exchanges, stop. Like, we'll just delete things now. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. But,
Yeah,
you know,
it's like,
maybe,
sorry, go ahead.
it's just, you know, maybe people need to just see shit this blatant to finally learn. But, you know, I think, I don't know. We're like 20 minutes in, and I know that your engineering, your and Janine's stories are probably going to spawn a lot of conversation. So you just want to slide along into that?
Sure, man. Yeah, it's one of these stories. You're right. It's pretty I don't know. Seems like it would churn up a lot of discussion. So, all right, everyone remembers earlier this year when Alex Jones was deplatformed for talking about the Sandy Hook school shooting, saying it was just a bunch of actors, and that's been the justification for removing his voice from all the main public forums on the internet. And well, now we are seeing more censorship, this time coming out of the subscriber service crowdfunding platform Patreon. However, this censorship story has a payment provider twist to it. So the censorship aspect of this story isn't really breaking news anymore. This has been going on for a little bit. In mid-August of this year, Patreon kicked Robert Spencer from their platform, who's, you know, a New York Times bestselling author, covers Islamic extremists, and he had this to say at the time, quote, "I've been axed from Patreon without explanation, warning, or notice. No doubt as part of the ongoing efforts of the left to deny all platforms to those who reject its agenda." Now, back in August, Patreon had responded saying, "Hi, Robert. We emailed you earlier today, which explained that unfortunately MasterCard required us to remove your account." And that tweet was back in August, and you know, from Patreon, didn't really get the attention it deserved at the time, and now everyone's putting it back under scrutiny for a good reason too. But just a second on that. So more recently, here on December 6th, Patreon kicked Sargon of Akkad, I guess that's how you pronounce that, off their platform for something he said on YouTube, some supposed racist remarks. And then later that same week, they kicked Milo Yiannopoulos a day after he opened his account. And these moves in turn prompted a revolt from big content creators like Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, and Dave Rubin. I think it was like mainstream media news there for a while, where Sam Harris is shutting down his Patreon. And yeah, this is really where the story started to pick up steam here in the Bitcoin space, because Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin hosted about a 10-15-minute video where they talked about searching for solutions outside of Patreon. And naturally, a lot of Bitcoiners are eager to tout our workaround for trusted third parties. But the reality is we just don't have the platform built out yet. And it would be great to see some big name content creators switch to a Bitcoin platform, but it's just not there yet. And now why should we re-examine the statement from mid-August about possible MasterCard censorship? Well, that stems from a discussion we weren't supposed to hear. Matt Christensen is a Patreon user who was subscribed to Sargon, and he is also a content creator for Patreon. When the Sargon story broke, he began discussing the topic on his channel, at which point Patreon's trust and safety team reached out to him to see if he'd be willing to discuss the topic with them. He agreed and was contacted by Jacqueline Hart, the head of the trust and safety team. Before the discussion really began, Jacqueline was very explicit how she didn't want this conversation to be recorded, which Matt obliged, but he did transcribe it for us to see what they're really thinking. And the transcribed discussion is in the links below in the show notes through ML Christensen's tweet. But there are three main takeaways from it. Patreon is not a free speech platform. It's not a free market, and their rules are subjective by design. Now, I'd like to read just a little bit from the transcribed conversation, so bear with me here. Matt says, does Patreon feel passionately about it, though? And this is in the context of free speech. Does Patreon feel passionate about it, though? Jacqueline responds, the problem is Patreon takes payments, and while we are obviously supportive of the First Amendment, there are other things that we have to consider. Our mission is to fund the creative class. In order to accomplish that mission, we have to build a community of creators that are comfortable sharing a platform. And if we allow certain types of speech that some people would call free speech, then only creators that use Patreon that don't mind their branding associated with that kind of speech would be those who use Patreon, and we fail at our mission. But secondly, as a membership platform, payment processing is one of the core value propositions that we have. Payment processing depends on our ability to use the global payment network, and they have rules for what they will process. And then Matt responded, are you telling me that this was Patreon's decision then, or someone pressured you into this? Jacqueline, no, this was entirely Patreon's decision. Matt, well, then I don't understand passing the buck off to somebody else. Jacqueline, no, I'm not passing the buck off. The thing is, we have guidelines, but I'm trying to explain. Number one, it is our mission to fund the creative class, and obviously some people may not want to be associated. Matt, well, if that's your mission, then payment processors are irrelevant. It's your mission. That's what you're pursuing. Jacqueline, we are not Visa and MasterCard ourselves. We can't just make the rules. That's what I'm saying. There's an extra layer there. All right. So she didn't outright say that the payment processors are calling the shots, but it sure sounds like they have a heavy-handed, they have a heavy hand around the office in decision making. So now the full discussion is in the show notes, like I said, and it goes into detail about the process of someone getting kicked off their platform. It all goes on a case-by-case basis for certain types of language, and in the end, it's all subjective. They choose who gets to speak on their platform and who doesn't. It's also interesting to hear these two discuss how you could approach them to ask if it's okay to talk about a certain subject and how they guide you from there. It's crazy how we're living in this world of deplatforming and Bitcoin, and this is one of those great use cases for Bitcoin if we can build out a solid solution for this. And anyway, this is an interesting topic that is not slowing down censorship and free speech. If anything, this story is ramping up, and we are starting to see who's with who on each side of the spectrum. What do you guys think? Did MasterCard tell them to act Sargon, or was it the trust and safety team? What do y'all think?
Well, I think that there is a little more going on underneath the surface here. I mean, for one instance, there is somebody, Nick Monroe on Twitter, that I think everybody should follow if they want to really keep up with this story as it evolves. But one thing he dug up a week or two ago was Jacqueline Hart's LinkedIn profile, which was since deleted, but he archived and has a number of screenshots of. And the interesting thing here is her employment history. Right now, she is the head of the Trust and Safety Board on Patreon that seems to have total arbitrary control over who to kick off the platform with just complete whimsy, with no basis in a consistent enforcement of their terms of service. But this is her employment history. January 2003 to December 2010, manager of risk operations and merchant support at PayPal. 2011 to 2012, manager of risk management at TSYS Merchant Solutions. 2012 to 17, the global head of risk and fraud at Ingenico ePayments. 2015 to 2017, a board member of the G2 European Client Advisory Board. 2015 to 2017, she was also a board member of the European Advisory Merchant Risk Council. 2017 to 2018, the director of fraud at Paddy Power Betfair, a sports betting operator. And then from October 2018 to the present, the trust and safety head at Patreon. So point blank, like, she has absolutely no history or experience whatsoever with community outreach, with any kind of creator platform like this. She is a banker. She is a fucking banker who has worked for payment processors her entire career in risk management. And to take it another step further, for years now, MasterCard and PayPal have been intertwining their businesses tighter and tighter. So the pressure, this is very undeniably clearly not just about Patreon. This is about payment processing companies deplatforming people because of their political views. And I fully expect over the next few years this to continue. Like, this is not just an issue with YouTube, with Patreon. This is an issue of people being cut off from financial services because the people providing those services do not like what you think, do not like what you say. And that is absolutely fucking unacceptable. That is effectively fucking exiling you from society. That is preventing you from accessing the things you need to make a living, to pay your bills, to feed yourself, to keep a roof over your head. And for the motivation in doing these things to be nothing but just differences of politics is insane. And mark my words, this is going to be the thing that triggers a huge, huge influx of people into using Bitcoin, because they're going to have no option right now. Like Tim Pool is another independent news commentator on YouTube, and he's actually a Democrat, one of the few left-leaning people who hasn't completely lost their mind over the last few years. And he is moving off of Patreon because of just the insanity and the running in circles and the not giving any kind of clear explanation of anything. Like, he was literally contacted. Like, he did not reach out to Patreon. Jacqueline Hart reached out to him to discuss Sargon getting kicked off of Patreon. And when he brought up concerns of other people still on the platform for violating the exact same things that Sargon was kicked off of for, and for context here, the reason Sargon was kicked off of Patreon ostensibly is because he said that white supremacists were white N-words. And Tim Pool pointed out to Jacqueline that there are people who literally use that word all over the place directly on Patreon who were not removed from the platform. And her response was, we cannot comment on other people's accounts. When she literally reached out to him to comment on other people's accounts, because there are huge numbers of people leaving the platform after this, because this is people's livelihoods. This is where they make their money. And to be in this situation where, because payment processors are now interjecting politics and cutting people off from finance because you think something we don't like, they're not going to take that risk. They're not going to stay on a platform where pressure from these payment processors could just arbitrarily cut them off from their livelihoods anymore. And they're going to immediately start looking for alternatives. And eventually, they're going to start making their way into Bitcoin. And Tim Pool, like one of his first responses when he announced he would be leaving Patreon is it's time to start learning how to use cryptocurrencies, because sooner or later you're not going to have any other choice. And like they literally have no idea what they've kicked off here. And I fully expect within the next 5 years to start hearing about people losing bank accounts simply because of things they said that were wrong think somewhere on the internet. Like this is the start of access to financial services becoming politicized.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see the blowback right now. Sorry, Janine, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, I mean, we've already seen, I mean, WikiLeaks wasn't the first to have this happen, but we've seen that the banks are willing to either participate or be influenced by pressure for closing down accounts related to political issues. And WikiLeaks was one of the high-profile cases several years ago where all of the American banks were pressured by the US government to shut down WikiLeaks's donation funds. Specifically, obviously, because the US government has since the beginning been trying to, cut WikiLeaks off or, accuse them of things, get them jailed in the United States or in other countries, pressuring other countries to put them in prison or detain them in some way. And because they had no case, they didn't have enough evidence to go for a prosecution. They instead thought, well, let's just put pressure on the banks, because none of this has, you don't have to even be accused of a crime, or you don't even have to be, it doesn't even have to be proven that you committed a crime for these payment processors to shut you off, because even though it's used as an arm of the Justice Department, there is no justice in any of these decisions, regardless of who they're targeting. It's not something where there is an appeal process. I mean, sure, you can technically appeal to the payment provider, but they have no obligation to listen to you. Like, they could just ignore you. So it's used as an arm of enforcement that has no judicial process whatsoever behind it, at least no fair process where you are actually formally accused of something. You are accused of something that is a crime, and then something is done about that. It is, talked about, discussed in, some kind of court or arbitration process where it is, the facts are found and then a decision is made. Obviously, that hasn't happened here. There's just been pressure, whether from, groups of individuals or from the government itself, or just because the banks are anticipating that this is going to be a problem, that maybe they will get attacked from either a government or non-government groups of individuals, to close bank accounts of certain people based on certain reasons. And this is going to happen on both sides. Like, right now, there's a perception that it's mostly happening towards groups that are perceived to be right-leaning, whether that's true or not. But it's also, I mean, at the time, WikiLeaks was perceived to be left-leaning. I mean, it had so much support from people who were left-leaning, it was perceived to be that way. So it's going to happen on both sides of the aisle, and so no one should be celebrating this. And I am kind of interested to see because what is the quote, necessity breeds innovation, or ingenuity. When you're put in a situation where your livelihood is put at risk, you're going to do everything you can to make sure that that does not actually happen. And there's a ton of, I mean, we're on YouTube. The chances of us getting censored are not that low. We don't have enough subscribers, and we're not exactly dealing with the types of content that usually attracts the attention for censorship. But there are people who face that legitimately or otherwise, that kind of criticism. And so those people who are put under that kind of pressure are going to be incentivized to build platforms that a lot of people in Bitcoin maybe are not even incentivized to build yet, even if we have the tools to do so, even if we have the knowledge to do so. So it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I would be surprised because I haven't seen anyone David Rubin, I think, accepts Bitcoin. I haven't seen any of the others directly. I mean, they might accept Bitcoin, but they don't push it that much. So it would surprise me if someone like Jordan Peterson started doing that. But yeah, that would be interesting if that happened, because it shows that, it's going even if they're perceived as right-leaning, I bet it's going to probably inspire people across the so-called political spectrum, if that kind of thing exists. It's going to inspire people from different political leanings to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we know that we have a payment processor that doesn't really look at politics, and that's Bitcoin. But it seems like in researching this, it's just like a lot of these subscriber models. Like, people look at their subscribers and say, like, okay, well, I have this amount of income coming in before me, so I can spend this much. Where right now with Bitcoin, you'd still have to have everyone sign their transaction every month, and it wouldn't be like this automatic once a month you get paid this amount of money. And so it's kind of hectic, I guess, for financial planning. But you're right. I mean, it's certainly going to breed the innovation to create that sort of scripting, or however exactly this is going to be done. I've seen some things, you know, of course, some people are seeing this, and it's a great way to push out some new ideas onto other chains to try and get attention. But I mean, like, this really does show their hand a little bit, to where I think maybe, yeah, the the crowd is waking up, so to speak. I mean, you're right. WikiLeaks was kind of the first to go down, and Snowden came out and said what he said, and we saw net neutrality go by the way, and Alex Jones went down, Robert Spencer, and now with Sargon, it seems like most of the people are starting to wake up to this idea that these are public forums that are providing people's income, and and good content. There's people out there that like Sargon and want to watch him a lot, and same goes with all these other guys. But we are starting to see how this is like a platform where they're beholden to the payment processor, and if you speak something that is not it's if you are a free speech advocate and you go out there and just start saying things because you like free speech, then you're likely to get shut down on these platforms. And yeah, it will probably spur a creation of another new set of platforms where, yeah, you have like these platforms that censor the right and these platforms that censor the left. And, it would be nice if we could create a system there where people can just go on there. And I mean, I think like you were saying, the main reason we're not really at risk is because we're too small. It's like, that was part of what Jacqueline was saying, is like they look at the numbers and they see, how many people are following you, how many people are listening to you. And I mean, they don't want these things. And I mean, that's where it's good to see, like, as much as I know they're just moving fast and breaking things, that Robinhood cash management system, and like just people using more about Bitcoin for remittance. And, people are starting to see how these payment providers, along with these online platforms, are really tyrannical in their fight against what are some core tenets to be an American citizen. And, it's just, it really is kind of, it's traitorous to me. I mean, like, as someone that, believes in the right to privacy and the right to free speech, and, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and everything that got us to where we are. And you start looking at the way things are nowadays, it's just, we live in a tyrannical online public forum where, you could get shut down for saying the wrong thing, and what might offend some people. I mean, if you post some video, it goes viral, and then all of a sudden people are listening to you. Well, then now you're at risk. And it's just it's upsetting to see. But I think we are starting to see more and more of that hand being shown. I mean, like, it's ridiculous right now when you see this withdrawal from Syria, and these people that are supposed Democrats being like, well, this is a stupid move. Like, why are we pulling people out of Syria? Why are you in Syria? Like, that is not some place you're supposed to be under constitutional way that you go to war. You can't just go in there, and you did that. And now we're pulling those people out. People aren't going to be being tortured. People aren't going to be dying on a daily basis. Like, your end goal that you're going for. I mean, like, they all just sort of look like they're aligning together, sort of showing their hand to where, yeah, hopefully it'll incentivize people to create out the solutions to solve this problem. Because this isn't just some little problem. Yeah, this is a big problem. It's not going away.
And one of the other things, I mean, besides just getting, it's kind of a related issue, but obviously this is about people getting kicked off of platforms, but there's also the problem that I was reading an article in the New York Magazine about that. I mean, I've seen this so many times where someone reveals that network traffic or ad revenue or whatever was based on bot activity or based on activity that is at least suspected to be mostly bots and automated for the purposes of generating engagement. And that's another issue because I mean, I don't know how many I haven't followed any of these people, so I don't know if any of them were using like YouTube advertising to get any of their income. But there are a lot of YouTubers who obviously do that. They rely on ad revenue. And that's another thing that could just go poof. And it has nothing to do with the platform censoring you. It's just the fact that these platforms have built a super parasitic model based basically on surveillance. And, if that gets revealed to be fake, well, the advertisers are going to pull out. I mean, it's bad in itself because the people that are advertising on your videos, you have no control over that. There was that problem, last year, or at least before BitConnect started to wind down because it was getting sued. People were getting upset that there was ads from BitConnect being displayed on cryptocurrency related videos, and it's like, well, that's what you bought into. That's what you get in exchange for the money. You have no control over who displays on your thing. You're basically selling out your viewers to anyone, including people like BitConnect, who will pay, the minimum amount of money just to get, some BitConnect influencer's video to start or play before yours in the middle of yours. Like, it's a parasitic model, and that is going to come crashing down, I think, even sooner than people getting mass deplatformed from Patreon or YouTube or any of these platforms. I think that's going to come crashing down sooner because it's all coming out that it's fake. Like, if your revenue model is based on clicks and views, I mean, you can just spin up a bunch of cheap phones and have them watch the videos, and you're not ever actually engaging with anyone who cares about your content. You may just be engaging with a bunch of bots who don't give a shit and will not do anything to, support your ideas in the real world. So is that what you really want? I mean, that's another part of this issue.
Yeah, the information given up and all that just to try and target ad someone, which I'm sure is effective in some right, but I mean, like, the fact that you're having to give up so much liberty to achieve that is doesn't add up at all. And I mean, these things have to fall by the wayside, and we have to kind of shake it off. It's kind of like we're moving from this realm of the way markets used to be into the way that they're going to be in the future. And there's all these hangups of the way business was done as usual in the old traditional markets, and like you start trying to port that over to where everybody can see what you're doing. And there's going to be a lot of blowback. It's good to see the blowback, and I'm glad we're thinking about ways to solve this problem because it's really important for free speech. It's not just like this is great for Bitcoin. It's like, this is great. If we can build this out, this is great for free speech. All right. So that's what was going on with Patreon. Now, what's going on with some YouTube stars and the Brave browser and all this nonsense I've been hearing about?
Yeah, it all happened basically right before Christmas. So I've previously talked about issues with Brave's basic attention token, primarily in episode 65, but also I think there was some mentions in episode 59, 130, and 137. One of the issues that I actually warned Brave about, that it would become a problem, was I did that on December 18th last year, so 1 year ago, was the fact that their browser with the payments feature enabled, that's not enabled by default. You have to actually turn that on, but you do get prompts in the default mode to turn on Brave payments. And by default, Brave Payments allows users to send tips in the form of their Ethereum ERC20 token called the BAT to creators who have not opted into the platform. As in, they may not even be aware the platform exists. They may be aware it exists, but they don't want to use it. That kind of thing. And you may be wondering, how is that possible? How can they send tokens to someone who has not opted in? Well, the tokens do not go directly to any creator. When the user sends their monthly batch of tips, they are put into an escrow fund that, should a creator that they tipped, such as a YouTuber or a website, decide to opt in to Brave Payments within a period of 90 days of that tip being made, which they can only do by giving over KYC data like tax forms and stuff to basically prove that they're going to pay taxes on their cryptocurrency earnings that go into a custodial wallet called Uphold. Those tokens will be sent along to that creator's account once they do that. But if a creator does not opt in, or maybe doesn't even know that Brave exists, a portion of the tokens which were generated as part of the user grant fund will be recycled back into that user grant fund, UGP for short. And it's not clear what the other category of tokens consists of. It was something that Brennan Ike brought up, but I assume that it is tokens which users have purchased directly instead of them being airdropped for free, which is what the user grant fund is for. And those are supposedly held in this escrow fund indefinitely, which seems like it's going to be a major issue for them, because that obviously would lock up a bunch of tokens if enough people decided to send them to unverified accounts. Now, you would not be alone in concluding that this sounds pretty contrived to fix the fact that Brave lets its users pretend to send tokens to people who don't use it as the default setting. Users can enable the setting. They have a setting option that only lists websites and channels that are verified, i.e. the creator has opted into the platform. But for some reason, they decided not to enable this by default. And their excuse since last year, has been that we find that publishers and creators are happy to find BAT waiting upon sign up, to which I responded last year. So not asking for consent to hold funds in escrow for people is fine, as long as you only consider the responses of people who would have consented anyway. Like, there's an interesting analogy that could be made there. And on December 20th, which is the recent event last week, Brave released a new tipping banner, preceding last week's incident. They released a new tipping banner feature on the desktop version of the browser, which adds a pop-up UI with the creator's image and various information about them pulled directly from their page or channel when you visit it. And according to Brave's blog post about the release, they wrote that publishers will have access to a dashboard that allows them to customize this banner specifically for their audience. But they also mentioned that, quote, Brave users will see this banner appear when they visit those sites, and technically that should be all sites, and click the Send Tip Now button in their browser's Brave Rewards panel accessible from the URL bar. In other words, this banner will appear on sites regardless of whether the creator is verified, i.e. they have opted into Brave Payments. You can see screenshots of this UI in a tweet that I listed in the video description from Jackson Palmer, who actually tried to see what it looked like. Within only 2 days of this release, one of the creators who predictably was not happy about this custodial escrow arrangement was Tom Scott, who you may be aware of as a popular YouTuber who makes videos about internet culture and always wears red shirts. He said on Twitter, I don't ask for donations or crowdfunding on any platform. If that ever changes, it will be incredibly obvious. If someone's asking you for money or suggesting that you can donate to me, it's not true and you should stay well clear. This warning is prompted by a company called Brave, who's been taking cryptocurrency donations for me using my name and photo without my consent. I asked them not to and to refund anyone who has donated. They said, we'll see what we can do, and also that refunds are impossible, end quote. And at the end of this initial thread from him, he urged his followers to donate to the Against Malaria Foundation instead. The response from Brave and BAT users was then far from pleasant, because while they kept repeating Brendan Ike and I believe another guy named Samson who does a lot, I think he does like user outreach or something. They kept repeating that they were taking Tom's feedback into account and would look into making changes, which is the exact same thing that he said to me 1 year ago when I warned them about this problem, or that it would be a problem. And Brendan Ike started debating Tom on Twitter about the legitimacy of his criticisms, and even compared Brave's solicitation of tips on behalf of creators as walking up to you and offering you cash. No, that's not really comparable at all, because it would be more akin to you setting out your hat on the sidewalk, asking for donations on behalf of a complete stranger who has no idea that you are collecting money or who you are. And then when that stranger comes across you collecting money on their behalf on the sidewalk, then they claim that they would give it to you anyway, or they would donate it to someone else if you didn't want it. That is called passing off. That is not walking up to someone. This scenario that they have is not comparable to walking up to someone with money and saying, here you go, because you first collected it from other people on the assumption that it would go directly to this person. There's also a thread in the Brave subreddit about this, and I would say easily half of the comments in there, which I linked in the description, were dismissive or critical of Tom as being someone who is stupid, malicious, or not seeing the vision of Brave. And then, on December 22nd, Brave tweeted, "We have heard your feedback." They didn't even, specify. "We've heard your feedback and we're making changes to Brave Rewards available tomorrow. It will, 1, clearly indicate which creators have not yet joined, and 2, not show unverified creator images in the tipping panel." And then this release actually appears in the Git repo for the browser as 0.58.18. And it says in the release notes, added text snippets from under the tip panel and tip banner when a publisher hasn't been verified, removed all images for unverified publishers on Brave Awards, and removed YouTuber favicons, I don't know how to pronounce that, for unverified publishers in the tip table under Brave Awards. So there has been a small victory, if you can call it that, but one of the things I did not really notice before this whole incident, what was it? It was something that Brendan Ike brought up, and I can't remember. Anyway, you guys can discuss, and I'll try and remember what it was that I thought of.
Well, like, this is nice that they've pulled that out, but it doesn't change the fact that they've been committing fraud. And also, I really hope that Brave is not registered out of California, because I know for a fact that this kind of setup violates their laws on holding somebody else's property, because Coinbase is actually being sued for a very similar thing with their email send function, where people have sent Bitcoin or other crypto to somebody's email through Coinbase, and Coinbase requires you register an account to redeem that property, which is a violation of California law on holding somebody's property. So if those BAT for unverified content creators sits there long enough, they're going to find themselves in violation of the exact same laws that Coinbase is being sued over. And the funny thing is, as all of the people that pertains to are not users of Brave, have not signed or agreed to any end user license agreement, they are not subject to the arbitration clause in Brave's terms of service and actually can sue them.
Yeah, it's this is one of those, whenever I read this story, I was just like, oh man, this is a shitty move. I mean, like, you just saw someone in the chat saying that they tipped the Block Digest channel through the Brave browser. And I mean, that's just where, yeah, it's ridiculous that they don't have something on there denoting that these people are not part of the Brave platform and that their funds are just non-refundable. And yeah, that's like where, yeah, I was looking at this, is just like, this is egregious as far as just allowing it to where all these content creators that have no business with Brave or Bat or any of that, and it's just like a open pit for somebody to just waste their money because they're not actually messing with it, and they don't have any sort of way to stop that. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, there has been so many YouTube comments or tweets on Twitter that I've seen where someone says like, "Hey, I just sent you some BAT tokens. I hope you like it." And then the person either doesn't respond, and I know either because I know that they're not into cryptocurrencies or they've actually said they don't use it, that those BAT tokens are gone. They're not actually going to go to that person. And for some reason, like, I told the Brave team about this last year, and they didn't think it was an issue, that was the default, where you could not only send to unverified creator because saying unverified is kind of a weird way to describe people who really have either no awareness of your existence, or who actively do not want to use your platform, like some other people I know. It's a weird way to call them unverified or whatever. But there's so many people who have done that by accident because the user interface does not make clear that with that language, it does not make clear that this person literally does not use the platform. And people use examples where, oh, you used to be able to send money from PayPal to someone who wasn't on PayPal by sending it to their email. Well, it's like, at least that's a direct notification that you generate. Whereas when you send a tip to someone, there is no automatic, they don't get an email from that. They claim that they email the publishers after like a certain amount of tokens accumulates in their escrow wallet held on their behalf. But other than that, they don't, they have no awareness that exists. And it's really sad because, there's a bunch of people who think that they're donating to these creators and they're not.
I wonder if this was like part of the plan to drive adoption. Was like, we'll just let people donate to creators, and once they get a big enough pile of BAT, they'll say, well, maybe that Brave browser isn't such a problem.
Yeah, I mean that's the main suggestion, is because they were doing this for a marketing reason, because obviously it looks a lot better when, you're using the Brave browser and every single website or YouTube channel you go to gives you the option to tip them when you actually can't. Like, if you had to actually search for the people who use it, you'd see a much, much, much smaller number come up. So yeah, it kind of just makes them look good, but it, like I told Samson on Twitter, like, you guys are being so arrogant, and they've done nothing for Tom. It's just made Tom upset that people have been donating or think they've been donating to him, and they haven't, because he doesn't accept donations in cryptocurrency or fiat, as far as I'm aware. And it just makes him upset. And so they haven't done anything to help him. They've just like ruined put a nail in, a few days before his Christmas holiday, that he had to deal with this. And like, he even made a tweet on Christmas Day saying, "Oh, there's still crypto nerds arguing in my mentions. Merry Christmas." It's like, oh, great. Thanks, Brave. You've just ruined, because there were other people commenting that they didn't even know Brave used the BAT token. Apparently they don't use it enough to get the notifications, or they've turned them off, because I know that they send notifications a lot to say, please enable Brave payments. Yeah, so a lot of people just now saw, they won't even be able to distinguish, like, this is the BAT token, it's not Bitcoin. They'll just see cryptocurrency and they'll be like, oh, look at these assholes who are doing things without people's consent. Whereas, on the alternative, but you can't, I mean, Coinbase maybe do something like that. They may be stupid enough, but I'm not aware of any service besides these weird Reddit tipping bots that accept Bitcoin on behalf of someone else. There's no one big or legitimate enough, as far as I know, unless Coinbase does it, in which case, of course, they do. Bitcoin is voluntary. You can accept it, or if you don't want to accept it, you just don't publish an address, and that's it.
Yeah, I can understand Tom's, being upset. I mean, like, just that one guy in the chat, and I'm like, well, that sucks, I mean, and I couldn't imagine if it was a bunch of people. That would really suck, and I'd feel bad about it. Yeah, let's keep driving in, because it sounds like we got another 10, 11 stories to get through. So let's dive into them, man.
Mm-hmm. So we covered recently that Bitmain shut down their division in Israel that was tailored towards R&D research. It's recently come out that they laid off their entire team devoted to developing a Bcash client in Golang. And now it's appearing that these layoffs are way bigger than just one division and one team. And a lot of conversation going on a platform called MyMy, which is pretty much their version of LinkedIn, is showing that starting Christmas Eve, I believe, a large series of layoffs that's estimated to be around 50% of the entire company is going. And this is going to be a huge restructuring for pretty much every team in the entire company. And I mean, as shown with the Bcash client team, some entire teams are being shut. I mean, well, one of the big instances is even their ASIC development team is going to be axed by 50% or more. And that's pretty much the core of their business. But, to kind of put things into perspective, there's really two ways to look at this. I mean, at the start of this year, they had around 1,000 people working at the entire company globally, and prior to these layoffs had around 3,100 people, which was even in excess of what they were trying to hire in their initial IPO prospectus in September. And given just the overall situation of their company specifically and the overall market, I mean, this just seems to me like they're trying to cut everything down to the bare minimum possible to continue going. And really, the other way to kind of look at this is these cuts are not just about sustainability in the long term, but also running out of cash. And I mean, if that second aspect of things really has some truth to it, then it seems pretty reasonable that dumping of their crypto assets is going to follow, because at that point, I mean, there's really not much else they can do. Like, their options are attempt to raise money, which they're trying to do through the IPO. So that's a non-starter in terms of a new solution to finance. Dump some of the old hardware that they have, which is not happening because it's, by the figures that we've had access to, almost $1 billion of obsolete hardware. Nobody's going to want to buy that. Or dump their crypto. And considering the fact that they only have a few tens of thousands of Bitcoin and the bulk of their crypto holdings is around 1 million Litecoin and 1 million Bcash, I think that would bode very poorly for Litecoin and Bcash to see that amount of supply start getting liquidated. And I mean, really, the question comes down to whether that happens OTC or on the open markets. But that's really just talking about a degree of difference in terms of what that is going to have on the price. Like an OTC sale is not going to immediately dump something like clearing an order book on an exchange, but it's going to have a notable effect on the price eventually. It's just a matter of delay and severity. But really, this just is, I mean, like, it's really nothing to say here except like they keep getting kicked in the dick every week. And they're going into triage at this point to try to save this company. And really, it's looking at things, even downsizing this, even restructuring things. It's really kind of hard to see how they can do that while also pull off a successful restructuring with this. I mean, even prior to layoffs, they had a large amount of their R&D team walk off. Like they have things spread between their artificial intelligence, division and their ASIC division. and both of those are going to be downsized. They've already shut down their Israeli branch, which was specifically for artificial intelligence like research. So like even like killing off half of their workforce, how do you walk away with that and make it work in the long term when the R&D division to continue improving your crypto mining ASICs is mostly left and started competing companies? How do you continue an innovative and successful artificial intelligence division when you literally just shut down the international subsidiary that was responsible for R&D into that? I mean, I can't see how they can really pull this off and have any hope of maintaining a dominant position in either of those markets. Like this just seems to me like just delaying the inevitable.
Yeah, it's just we can call it some more popcorn, or just doesn't look good for Bitmain. I mean, like, yeah, it feels like watching a swimming match. You know, that guy that's just way, way behind. They're not going to catch back up, and it's just, it's like, keep fighting while you can. The race is still on, but eventually it will end, and yeah, the lights will turn out. I mean, yeah, we've seen it just with the Bcash split to SV and ABC, the miners with their failed 10 nanometer, 7 nanometer tape outs, and now this lawsuit for this class action lawsuit on unauthorized mining and slow startup procedures, built into their equipment. And at the same time, they got the people pretty upset about the whole Bcash insider trading. People running around with that. So yeah, it's hard to look at Bitmain and say like they're in any sort of good position. And we are seeing other guys step up, and everybody's hurting in the well, not everybody, but a good percentage of the mining industry is hurting. And whenever you've had mistakes like this that you've made that really kind of put you in a position where, yeah, it's you know, yeah, you could get the lights put out on you whenever these hurting times come up, and if you've made the wrong decisions in long term thinking.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it just seems unbelievable that they're going to pull this off, because really at the end of the road they're on, they're still going to need to depend on that IPO to raise capital to actually deal with the long-term issues lacking any kind of competitive R&D. And with what we've seen lately, the Hong Kong exchange is hesitant to approve any mining related company IPO period, let alone one for a major company like Bitmain that just point blank committed financial fraud in how they cooked their books, lying about investors that had never put any money into the company, and then literally took a position of total dominance in the ecosystem and just smashed themselves to pieces, being morons and sinking all of their money into trying to supplant Bitcoin with a copy paste shitcoin.
Yeah, it's I mean, we could say that the holidays over there at Bitmain are not too happy. That's probably a for sure statement.
Mm-hmm. Next up, because the next two stories are also loosely related to mining, but Ebang, as we mentioned the last episode when talking about the Hong Kong exchange hesitance to approve crypto IPOs, their application lapsed. And so they've recently refiled for an IPO with new figures for the the new financial quarters that were not present at the time. And they're still kind of like Bitmain, playing a little bit of a game here, whereas they're allowed to not submit the last 6 months of financial statements from the time of the filing. And so they've only filed financial information up to June 30th, which is pretty much, the still quarter three and then soon to be quarter four figures haven't been publicly disclosed. And just for quarter two, they're going to be in the hole. Or I mean, not in the hole, but like their growth and their revenue is dropping. And so despite big increases from 2017, their revenue is coming down, their profits are coming down. And they also stated that even for quarter three, there's been significant decreases. But they're still trying to go ahead with the filing here. And so, like, it's really just overall, like you said, a lot of these mining companies and miners are just really hurting right now with the market. And I mean, kind of dive into the next story a little bit just because of how it relates. But GMO in Japan has apparently decided to stop making and selling crypto mines. Pretty much a year after getting into the business, they've written off around $321 million of losses. And, that's really it. And it really sucks to see because they were really pretty quick out of the gate in terms of getting to the cutting edge of efficient hardware and putting something out to market that was somewhat competitive with the existing companies out there. But, even a giant conglomerate like GMO is looking at a year of this and just going, no, like this was nothing but a huge loss through the entire venture. And so they're done doing retail sales for mining equipment. Although the one thing I do want to point out here is they're not done mining themselves. And so they are going to continue operating their own mines as long as the revenue from that exceeds the operational cost. And so pretty much what they're going to be doing is writing off all of the equipment as a loss, eating that, and then keeping the mining equipment that makes economic sense to running. And one of the things, I see when I look at this is maybe the first step in just kind of a shifting of the mining ecosystem as far as corporations like this. It's always like literally from the day that ASICs were first developed, like a lot of Bitcoiners have gone like, why the fuck are you selling them? Like if you can make ASICs, if you have that competitive edge, then why aren't you just mining yourself? And I mean, I've always kind of thought that the longer Bitcoin continues to exist and the more like this ecosystem evolves, we would see like bigger concentrated players in mining with more of a distribution of balance between them. And I really want to like see over the next year or two how GMO continues to handle their mining operations. Because it's 1 year that pretty much came down from the peak where they were dealing with retail sales and suffered a huge loss from that. But they already have that equipment, so they can continue stockpiling Bitcoin. And I mean, really, if this does play out in a way where with some of the most efficient hardware on the market moving to cheap energy sources, they can continue accumulating at the bottom. And as we come out of a bear market, whatever kind of gains that realizes in the long term, one, it might make them reassess the current attitude after this last year in terms of the ecosystem. But it also might make a lot of other companies reassess just how they even look at mining as an investment in itself, in terms of not looking for quarter over quarter profits, but if you can establish a decent sized mining operation and accumulate those coins with a very, very low time preference, then it still might make economic sense to operate hardware, knowing that you're guaranteed whatever percentage of the overall hash rate in terms of Bitcoin, and you can hold that. Because I mean, it's still quite a lot of room for growth in terms of, you know, fiat price appreciation if Bitcoin is actually going to do what we all want it to do. And that kind of attitude change might just lead to less of a retail facing ASIC market and just more large scale corporations with access to resources necessary, just building chips literally just to mine themselves. And like there's already some companies out there very quietly that do this. And, you know, GMO is kind of the first more public instance of, well, some kind of similar situation. And depending on how this plays out for them over the next year or two, I think it might get a lot of companies in the space kind of rethinking how they look at and approach mining.
Yeah, I mean, the mining ecosystem's like an ever evolving thing, right? I mean, you know, we've seen the hash rate growing like crazy, and over this past year, and then we saw it drop, and then we saw a lot of, you know, coins take the fall out of that, and you know, getting 51% attacked, and yeah, but at the same time, you know, like we see this sort of nightmare scenario playing out for Bitmain. But you know, yeah, these other guys like GMO, I think, yeah, they're slowing down on the B3 retail miner makes sense right now, because right now you're not seeing a lot of retail, you know, mining going on. There's already a good amount of retail miners out there, and you know, a lot of those people are kind of shutting down for right now, or they're moving to a place where there's cheaper energy, or they can you know, and they can stay profitable. But I mean, like, that's, you know, like GMO, they've been the best as far as releasing information on their earnings and what their you know, plans are as far as a roadmap and everything. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how exactly they take this, because yeah, we know that they are still mining and they're looking for cheaper, more renewable energies. And you know, I mean, I could see there being this moment where there's a lot of these people that are coming into the space and you know, building out these big renewable energy systems that are able to mine very efficiently. And it's going to be an ever changing thing. I mean, even as you know, the fee market develops, and you know, if we do get to this these moments of, you know, hyper Bitcoinization, where it's like, you know, good luck getting somebody to sell their Bitcoin. I mean, you know, you'll have people firing back up those retail miners at home just because, like, that's the best way to get it, and it looks like it's going to be profitable again. And so it's ever evolving and changing. And you know, I mean, yeah, GMO seems to be like one of the guys running out the, you know, the lead there with you know, we know that Intel said something about building out some sort of Bitcoin ASICs too. So, you know, there could be these guys that are, yeah, already sort of mining with some ASIC chips that they haven't really released for market, because they're trying to take advantage of the efficiencies that they've built out. So yeah, we just got to keep our eye on it. It's going to keep changing.
I mean, mostly it's just the contrast between a company like Bitmain or Ebang and GMO is, when you look at Ebang or Bitmain, they're a company that literally broke into this space, and that's where they came from. Like, everything was thrown into developing mining equipment, selling mining equipment. That's their entire like revenue. Whereas GMO is a giant conglomerate that offers all kinds of different services in Japan. And they have much more of a capability to just kind of write this off and then continue their own mining operations. So like that's kind of what I'm saying is like at this point, like there are way too many companies getting into this. I mean, even Samsung is fabbing these chips. So like I just see that natural trend away from like these companies who just blew up and have insanely disproportionate influence in this space, and more towards just other pre-existing conglomerates that actually have the capital to kind of ride these market cycles on longer time horizons. Like this is not going to bankrupt GMO. Like it's going to hurt and it's a big loss, but like they have a shit ton of different companies offering different products and services under them, and this one being a failure is not the end of them. Like as opposed to somebody like Bitmain, like if like they go under because crypto mining wasn't working out for the last year or so, like they're fucked. The whole company goes under. Whereas if you have these larger corporations dealing with much bigger like pools of assets and money, they can ride it out longer. And like that's just like it just seems the natural thing. The more these markets mature, the bigger we grow. Like these market cycles are still going to be here for quite a while to come. And it might make sense for a lot of these larger like technology conglomerates to start looking at this as just a way to accumulate Bitcoin on longer time horizons.
Yeah, I mean, like, completely agree. I mean, they have the funds to weather the storm, and these guys that just sort of made a name for themselves in the space, and that don't really have those reserves because they made some bad decisions. Ouch time.
All right. Next up is a little bit of a shock for me, but there seems to be a bit of a shifting attitude in India. And it really is just kind of quite sudden and abrupt. The day after Christmas, the New Indian Express has announced that the panel set up to kind of analyze and recommend regulations and legislation for cryptocurrencies uh, has had a really quick shift in attitude. And one quote given by an anonymous official who attended it is, "We have already had 2 meetings, and there is a general consensus that cryptocurrency cannot be dismissed as completely illegal. It needs to be legalized with strong riders. Deliberations are on." And so this seems just in quite like stark contrast compared to what was coming out of this committee and media in India over the past 3 or 4 weeks, with apparent recommendations from this committee to outright ban any kind of private cryptocurrency with potential exemptions for state created systems. And like honestly, like I really don't know what to make of this. Like whether this is just the new variation of the same kind of nonsense that China has pulled for years, with attempts at market manipulation based on quickly shifting statements from the government. But if this really is a genuine change in attitude, then I'm kind of like at a loss for whether to call it a net positive or a negative, because an attitude shift like that just doesn't make sense to me without ideas for very strict regulation about how you can use and handle cryptocurrency. And there was already kind of an attitude that it was unacceptable as a medium of payment. So, like, what exactly do they plan on doing in terms of strict riders, so to say, if they aren't going to make it outright illegal? Like, is this going to involve, like, some kind of registry of crypto ownership? Like, are they going to institute much more strict taxation? I mean, Like, I just don't see a change like this without some plan on discouraging use in a way that isn't just outright banning it.
Yeah, I mean, like, definitely a big turnaround from the things we've been hearing in the past. But yeah, I think it is definitely going to be some strong rules enforced there with this possible legalization of cryptocurrencies there in India. But I mean, that's what they were saying. Before all this is like, this is all just money laundering, and we've got to get this under control. Like, I could see it become something where it's like such a hassle that people don't want to deal with it. So, I mean, it's such a light touch on this with the regulation is the way that you want to be. I mean, if you don't have anything, people think it might be illegal and they don't really want to get into it. And then if you have something too heavy handed, then it might just be too complicated and cumbersome to where they don't want to deal with it. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to say how to take this, other than I guess it's better than saying they want to ban it. But yeah, we're gonna have to another wait and see how it develops.
Mm-hmm. I guess it would not be right to come back after a week break and not talk about the ridiculous drop in pretty much every legacy market out there.
Times of weakness.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just like this is really going to be kind of a make or break in terms of whether Bitcoin can function as a safe haven asset and actually decorrelate from like legacy markets. And I mean, to really kind of put that into perspective, like just think about all the market cycles that Bitcoin has gone through and the fact that in 10 years it went from a low of $0 to an all-time high of 20,000. And then think about the fact that that occurred during one of the biggest bull markets in the US stock market in history. So all of the insane growth that we've seen was in what should have been the environment where it made no sense to deal with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies because the stock market's doing fine. Why do we need something that's designed to be an alternative hedge against inflation? But here we are, and for the last month, markets have been smashing down. I mean, the Dow and the S&P 500 are down what 12% over the last month. And one of the funniest things I've seen is Trump shit talking the Fed president, and he was responded to by David Rothschild, the economist, who I'm paraphrasing here because it's been a few days since I've seen the tweet, but he said something to the effect of, "When are you going to shut the fuck up? Don't you know that every time you shit talk the Fed, the markets take a tumble? Just shut the fuck up."
Yeah, it was that tweet. It wasn't all the years of corporate welfare or anything.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, pretty much like everything is down on the year to date. I mean, gold, the the euro, the S&P, the Dow Jones. I think like some of the only things that are up in the year to date performance so far are the VIX, which is a volatility index, natural gas, wheat, cocoa, oats, palladium, corn, the dollar, the yen, and feeder cattle. And other than that, pretty much every major market is sitting on a huge loss. And a lot of mainstream economists are pretty much projecting that this is going to continue through a good chunk of next year. And so, really, I mean, this is really a make or break moment. Like when this crazy bull market in all kinds of legacy equity instruments comes to an end, what's going to happen to Bitcoin? Are people actually going to move in and use it as a safe haven or something non correlated? Is it going to react properly, or is it going to keep trending down? Because like this is really the whole point of it, is to have something disconnected from all these other things. And if Bitcoin fails in doing that, I mean, that's not necessarily a hit to its utility in terms of value transfer, but like that is a huge hit into the rationale why liquidity would pour into it. And long term, that is a very necessary thing for more and more people to use it for the utility of transferring value.
Well, I mean, I think the reason actually that the Bitcoin price is going down like a lot of other things is because the kinds of people who have bought into Bitcoin in the last year with that major price rise were not people who were buying it as a store of value. They were buying it as something that they thought they could get rich quick on. And getting rich quick, anything quick, is not a store of value use case. So that doesn't surprise me. They were buying into it because they were trying to treat it like all the other stocks. And then when they realized it wasn't, obviously that's going to make the price return to a lower level than it was before, but certainly much higher than when it started, a year ago or a year and a half ago. But for the time being, still, I think even within the next year, it's probably going to be correlated to the overall direction of like the stock market and things like that, because the mentality of the people who are participating in that trading has not diverged enough yet.
I can agree with that. I mean, like, it does feel like this market pain, that everybody's feeling did drag Bitcoin and all of the crypto market down a good bit too. And, somebody was saying something about markets that I thought just sounded, pretty well put when they said that, markets are correlated until they aren't. And when they aren't, that's whenever you see a decoupled asset. And I mean, that's where a lot of people, yeah, they came in on the price rise. That was, pretty much, yeah, the end of a 9-10 year bull run for the stock market. And, they thought it was just another payday, and they FOMO'd in, and now they're hurting. So, you can see those guys kind of stepping out. But, you know, it is interesting that this would be the first, whenever the next market collapse happens, it would be the first market collapse with Bitcoin in the history books with that market collapse. And we can actually see, because I think that once there is like a, a moment of just, God, what is that called? Again, whenever you capitulate, there will be a moment of this capitulation where we will see basically Bitcoin and the rest of the, maybe not the rest of, but a good portion of the crypto market sort of just decouple from the bulk of investments. And that might be whenever we see hyper Bitcoinization take off and all that. It's really just a bunch of market theory, but without a doubt, it's the first time in history Bitcoin's been there on the sidelines of a collapse. So it'll be. I'm not rooting for any kind of market pain, but it's interesting that it's there now. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, and 5 more stories to go. So, in South Korea, um, their Blockchain Enterprise Promotion Association, which was founded over the summer this year, is really kind of going full retard. And they're going to be attempting to lobby the municipal government in Gwangju, the sixth biggest city in South Korea, to try to establish a crypto valley district. Um, And they're pretty much going to try to argue with the mayor and the city officials that they could create 1 million new jobs by doing this. And honestly, like, that is just so beyond absurd. I don't even know where to start. Like, Bitmain, despite how bad they're failing right now, was one of the biggest companies in this ecosystem, and they employed 3,000 people at the top. So like this kind of nonsense is like really going to take a jurisdiction like South Korea that has been pretty receptive and open to this ecosystem, and I think really sour a lot of people in the government to the entire technology. When you have a group like this trying to get a government to set up incentives for businesses and making insane claims like that. Like I like a million jobs. Like that's something major manufacturing corporations couldn't do that. I mean, like Foxconn moving into Wisconsin, which was a huge deal, is going to create a projected what 10,000 jobs. So you're going to need the equivalent of hundreds of Foxcons opening booming successful businesses dealing with blockchain to create that kind of employment. And it's just never going to happen. Like, period. So like this, I hope really falls flat on its face, because this is going to do nothing but really build up a lot of expectations that just never get met.
Yeah, there's a lot of that crypto valley buzz everywhere. Yeah, I know. Switzerland kind of took the lead on that, and now everybody's trying to, it's like all the buzzwordy, and people like the idea of it, and but yeah, million jobs. That sounds like a crypto New Deal or something, and that's just yeah, it's not really looking at the space correctly. I mean, if anything, you'll attract a lot of value to your area, but I mean, there's not that many people working around in this, and still a lot of education to go. So yeah, crypto valley buzz, it's everywhere, even around here, I'll tell you.
And something else that just happened in South Korea, and honestly, I don't really know how I feel about this, but a court in South Korea acquitted Bithumb from any wrongdoing in a case with 30-year-old Ann Park, who had his Bithumb account hacked on November 30th of 2017 and lost almost $355,000. And the issue here is that if as a user your account is compromised due to your failure, I think it's absolutely insane to try and hold an exchange or other company responsible because of your failure. But I also don't like the underlying reason here for this ruling, which is essentially that the Bithumb is not a financial service company. And like that was kind of the basis of Mr. Park's lawsuit, is that as a financial service company, they should be held to the kind of standards that banks are. And his argument was that they did not have solid enough security. And the judge ruled in their favor that they had carried out whatever financial duty they have, or fiduciary duty, by sending him SMS notifications of every transaction that happened on his account. And he did not take any kind of action in time to prevent the theft or withdrawal of these funds. So it's like, on the one hand, I think it would be insane to set a precedent that if a single user's account is hacked, that they're not that they are responsible for the monetary loss. But I also don't like the fact that kind of the basis of reaching this conclusion is less about the onus of securing that account being on the user and more about the exchange not being held to the same kind of fiduciary responsibilities as other financial institutions, because they clearly are one. And so it's kind of a weird case in my opinion, where I think the appropriate ruling was reached, but I do kind of worry about where this precedent could be taken in the future in terms of other cases where it would make sense to hold whatever exchange accountable for lost funds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with you, though. I mean, as far as just like if it's on the user who, put their account at risk, I mean, these are third-party exchanges, and I mean, it's very easy if your account gets compromised for someone to go in there and withdraw the coin. So, yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot going on there too with South Korea and Japan and these hacks that have happened in the past year, and trying to build out self-regulatory bodies that come up with best practices to clear this stuff out. So I imagine there's a lot of thought that went into it between exchanges, but yeah, I mean, if it's something where the exchange should be held accountable, then I think that certainly should happen. But on this case, I don't know. It just looks like it was just too much information given out from the user.
Mm. And then 3 more to go. So a group called Clover did a report looking at remittance use of different payment rails. And I do want to kind of caveat here that the study they did for this report only had a sample size of around 700 people. So, depending on the sampling criteria, I think there is definitely a lot of potential margin of error in terms of the percentages they gathered, but I still think it's interesting that overall the conclusions regarding cryptocurrency was, out of the people sampled, a little over 15% actually used crypto for remittances, with the vast majority using PayPal or Western Union, around 50%, and 25% using traditional wire transfers, with kind of the remainder dealing with either cash by mail or check or money order online or by mail. And the satisfaction percentage is pretty much, for more online oriented services, or 93% satisfaction, and then with a money transfer service like PayPal or Western Union, 84%, and traditional wire services, only 73% were satisfied with the overall service. As for the people actually using cryptocurrencies, 85% of them said that they preferred using cryptocurrencies for remittances as opposed to other services. And again, despite the small sample size, I think it's pretty interesting that even in the United States, that we can see a noticeable percentage like that of people using crypto for remittances, despite the fact that, being a first world country, there are really a lot of options to move money around. Most of like the really big developments we've seen with remittances in the space have been more focused on places like Asia or Africa, where there's a lot more complications in terms of the interconnection of different banking systems and just a lack of infrastructure built out for these things. But in a place where none of those things are really a huge issue, you still have with this sample size, 15% of people using remittances. And like, that's a, it's, I don't know. Sorry, guys. I still have a bit of a fever, so I'm getting kind of scatterbrained. But,
It's all right, man. Like, go ahead. Sorry.
we have a solid use case like this that has been around for as long as we've had sizable fiat markets continuing to develop all over the place. We have the entire situation going on with Patreon that is going to be a huge motivator for people to actually start looking into Bitcoin for an entirely different reason. And I expect that use case to grow heavily. And we have just more mature market infrastructure being built out everywhere. And it's just that fusion of liquidity and market growth and actual persistent use cases is really just setting up a synergy that's never really been that sizable in Bitcoin's history. And that's something that is going to really keep the system functioning and sustainable. Whereas without it, it would be subject to much more wild swings and volatility. And it's just that kind of feedback loop of value creates use, creates value, creates use. Like, it's the more you look around, like over the last year, the more that feedback loop is growing and speeding up.
Yeah, I mean, like that Patreon story we were doing earlier about how if we could come up with a platform to route around these payment processors deciding whose speech is good to hear and who should be, quieted down. I mean, that's a use case where whenever it comes out and people start to see that and notice it for what it is. I mean, I think you could create that feedback loop where people start to say, wow, this is kind of empowering liberty and independence and people's, ability to speak freely. And the same goes with remittance. Remittance is you're in a situation where you're in a foreign country and you're probably not exactly getting the best treatment or wages or any of that stuff because it's a tough time going out there. But it's even tougher when you go to try and send your money home to your family, and this kind of takes that burden away. And it's one of those where, yeah, it could be very liberating to have this remittance use case, really expanded out and people really taking advantage of it. And yeah, I could see it totally feeding back to where more people start to see it as a positive net benefit and in their lives.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess last two things are just two quick announcements. The launch of Bakkt is probably going to wind up being delayed due to both government holidays and then the current government shutdown in the US. Pretty much the last thing before launch they need is to get an exemption from CFTC regulations requiring that somebody other than Bakkt actually custodies the assets they trade. And seeing as their whole platform is built around their own warehouse for Bitcoin, they're going to need to get approval from the CFTC, go through a 30-day comment period with the public, and then have the commissioners go over public commentary on this exemption before actually voting on the proposal. And so depending on how long all of this goes down, this is probably going to be another launch delay, although it's nothing at all to do with the actual compliance or regulators' attitude towards Bakkt itself. It's just one of those stupid issues with bureaucratic scheduling. And two, can probably go into this a little more in the next episode, but Mimblewimble is about to be here with Grin, the original implementation developed by a number of different synonymous developers, gearing to launch on January 15th with a much more bare bones command line oriented setup. And Beam, which is a scammy shitcoin Zcash version of Mimblewimble, pulling the founder's reward bullshit and operated by a company. And I do have to say, I hope he's watching, but Guy Corum, you are a fucking petty piece of shit, because they have set the launch for Beam for January 3rd. And I guarantee you the reason is because in his retarded shitcoin addled brain, January 3rd is not the Bitcoin network's birthday, because Satoshi could have secretly pre-mined the 5 days or whatever until the client was released with the Genesis block hard coded. And I guarantee you he's doing this just so he can say Beam's birthday is actually January 3rd. Well, Guy, fuck you. You're a scammy piece of shit, just like the entire Zcash company. Go fuck yourself. All you're doing is just diluting an actual solid protocol with a bunch of different shitcoin clones of it. It's a technology. If you really gave a fuck about anything but lining your own pockets, you could have just contributed to Grin. So, going to be interesting to see how these play off. Let's go Grin. Beam, you can go fuck yourself. You're a bunch of shady shitbags. And I guess that wraps it up for today.
All right, man. Yeah, it's like delayed is becoming the next 2 weeks meme or whatever. And yeah, I'm interested to see Grin. And didn't know about Beam, but yeah, it's just like you can't get anywhere without somebody trying to replicate and grab some dough on the way. But yeah, just a final thought here. Get your resolutions in order, because we are about to face the new year. And if you're going to tackle those things for real, then you better not be making those resolutions the day you wake up on January 1st. So get your resolutions in order and, try and get those things getting worked on. And posted a link here that you might be able to relay back to the chat. Just something to keep your eyes on while you're worried about price or whatever you have worries about. It's we got another happening countdown clock going up. So keep your eyes on that. Get your resolutions in order.
All right, final thoughts. Let me get yours set up, Janine. Sorry, I've been distracted bickering in a chat box. Do, 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 do. All right. Whoa. All right. I think we're there. Did my brow? There we go.
Yep. So, for any of you who don't know, today was the start of the Chaos Communication Congress, which is the annual, most popular annual hacker conference in Germany. And I haven't watched too many of the talks yet. There were only two that really caught my interest at the moment to watch live. The first one was about the various pilot programs that may go into the Chinese social credit system, which was really interesting, and the reasons why and the effects it already has, because China to some degree has social credit systems in place in terms of monitoring people's behavior and then that behavior having various consequences. This was another talk about a antivirus program that North Korea uses, only within North Korea, as far as he understood. called Scylla Vaccine. And one of the funny slides from that talk was the encryption key. I'm not sure exactly what it was for because I kind of spaced out at this point, but then I heard the word encryption key. And it was funny because this encryption key says that the value of it is this random string of characters that's on the slide there. You see Vox, JSDK, etc. And at first he was like, well, that just looks random. But then he actually took a Korean keyboard and matched the keys or clicked on keys that would correspond to keys on an English keyboard. And it would spell out this, other string with Korean characters. And he put that into, I think that's Google Translate. And it translated to pattern encryption in English, which is hilarious. It's basically the North Korean version of using password as your password. So definitely check out that conference. All of the talks are live streamed and it's a very good setup, so shouldn't be too hard.
All those admin passwords out there.
Alrighty. Final thought. I don't have any. My brain hurts.
Final thought, stay healthy.
Yeah, watch out for those alien facehuggers. But okay. So somebody reached out to me over the last week to try and give me a personal donation, and I directed them to send it to the digest address so that we could keep amassing funds to eventually turn around and do something productive with. So you know who you are, and thank you very much. I actually think it's the biggest single donation we ever got. So thank you much. We all appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it, guys.
All right.
And going into the new year, we will continue to not have ads enabled because fuck ads.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And on that note, barring another facehugger attack, we will see you guys on Sunday for the season finale. Toodaloo.
Later, everyone.
Woo!